This case is the Phanteks Eclipse P360A, which is going on sale in the UK at the unusual price of £63.95. In euros, $69.90. In dollars, $69.99. That makes it budget. It makes it the cheapest Phanteks I've ever had in for review. It makes it about half the price of the P500A I had in a couple of months ago. I like that case a lot. This is a different kettle of fish. This is a cheap Phanteks. Before we can look inside, the peel. Just realised there's plastic on the inside of the glass as well. We're going for the double peel. What do you get for £64? Tempered glass side panel. Seems solid enough to me. Magnetic dust filter on the top, which opens up radiator or fan mounts. On the back, steel panel, no noise deadening material. We have Velcro straps for cable management. There's a channel there. We don't have any grommets, but we do have pass-through holes. And then we come to the front panel. We've seen a panel similar to this on a number of Phanteks cases in the past year or maybe two, which is it's a single piece of perforated steel that's then attached to a frame. The steel there all the way around is one piece, and then you have the mounting mechanism on the back. And then in the front we've got a pair of drive bays with the accessory box. Doesn't feel like there's a lot in there. Accessory box, there's a how to put your PC together guide. And a handful of screws and some cable ties. The user guide has got some RGB showing. And the reason is because these two fans at the front, these two 120 fans, are RGB. And on the top panel we have the familiar Phanteks RGB control button. Go around the rear to where the cables are, and we see a 5-volt digital RGB connection. And there are the two plugs for the two fans on the front. They are 4-pin, they're PWM. A great many cases have annoyed the heck out of me because the supplied fans are 3-pin. I've occasionally referred to those as fixed speed, which is completely wrong. Those would be voltage control. These are PWM. These are what I regard as proper. So we've got PWM RGB fans, 2 of, included in this £64 case. As a consequence, you don't get a fan at the rear, you don't get any fans in the roof. So you're either going to have to add extra fans, logically with your liquid cooler if you're using an all-in-one, or you need to move one of the fans from the front. What else do we have? We've got a pair of SSD sleds, and we have a space where you could add a third if you buy it as an accessory. So that's 2 drive bays in the front, which are 2.5 3.5s, and 2 2.5s. That's a lot of potential for storage. The drive cage in the bottom is secured with 4 screws, 2 there, 2 there. So removing that if you want extra space, no difficulty. The power supply shroud appears to be one piece of steel along with this cable cover and the motherboard tray. That's all neatly done, and we're becoming familiar with this approach with the Phanteks Eclipse range. Reduce costs by using more expensive tooling, and then you have one single piece of metal does multiple jobs. Very nifty. Actually, well, let's just see how rigid the case is. So I've got all the panels off. Actually, that's really impressive. That's not moving at all. Front panel off. It's solid, like a rock. Wow. We've got many drive bays, we've got 2 RGB fans, we've got filtration on the front and the top and the bottom. We've got a load of space inside in the main compartment where we can go up to a smaller E80X board, but realistically ATX, any graphics card you like. In terms of cooling, we could put a 240 rad or pair of 120 fans in the roof. We could put a 240 or 280 in the front, and we can obviously add a 120 at the rear. Little bit surprised there's no capacity to put a 140 at the rear, but they've obviously kept the design just as slim as they can. Oh yes, I was sent this, a vertical GPU bracket. Phanteks has designed the P360A so you can remove all the expansion covers and you have a completely open back to the case. Then you take your riser bracket, in it goes, and you've got a couple of choices of position. It could go there or it could potentially go higher. But let's go for the logical place. There. And now you can go for a vertical GPU mount in your case. Loads of space. That looks interesting. The snag is this vertical GPU mount is £40, which if you're buying a case for 100, 120 is one thing. When you're paying 65, that's a big chunk of change. It takes the overall package to over £100. Nonetheless, the fact you have the option I quite like. For my build, the obvious easy approach is to put a 240 AIO in the front of the case, which means I can hang on to the two RGB fans. In that position I might have to add extra fans, but that would be neat and tidy, and I'm not going to do that. I'm going to go for a slightly more complicated approach that may or may not work. It might be a catastrophe. We shall find out. So I'm going to use this EK240 radiator with a DDC pump on this bracket. That is going to go in the front, and my motherboard assembly is this X570 Aorus Elite from Gigabyte with an EK quantum magnitude block on the Ryzen 9 3900X processor. That's a nickel block. It looks absolutely superb. We've got 32 gigabytes Corsair Vengeance LPX running at 3600 megahertz. There's an M.2 under that cover there. Motherboard assembly is ready to go. The DDC pump does not have a reservoir, so I'm going to use this quantum volume from EK. It's a 120 unit. Going to put that up there in the front fan position in the roof of the case. That's my plan, and in addition I'm hoping I can use that vertical GPU mount, even though as I say £40 in a 64 pound case may not make economic sense, but it could be fun. Power supply, Seasonic Prime Titanium 850 watts. That should keep everything under control. We've got a lot of components to go in this budget case. Should be fun seeing how it works. With the motherboard assembly installed, we can turn to the cooling system. At the front of the case we have an EK SE240 radiator with an EK DDC 3.2 PWM Elite pump. One by one I removed the screws retaining the original fans and replaced them with longer screws that go through the fans and the case and into the radiator. After that, it's the 120mm EK quantum volume reservoir in the roof of the case. And doesn't that look neat? Then it's time for the power supply. The Seasonic Prime TX850 goes in from the side of the case rather than the rear. It's quite tight, but it does go in without too much difficulty, and then I can connect the cables to the motherboard. I'm not sure the two stock 120mm fans at the front of the case will provide sufficient cooling, so I've added two Phanteks F120 MP PWM fans, one at the rear of the case and one in the roof of the case behind the quantum volume reservoir. I've got most of the components installed, including the vertical GPU mount I showed you earlier, and now I need a graphics card, and I'm going for this Palette RTX 3080 Gaming Pro with a brand new alpha-cooled GPU block. And doesn't that just look like a fine piece of work? I think that graphics card looks absolutely superb. I'm going to have to finish off the loop, fill it up, and then see how it behaves. That's the loop complete, and my chosen coolant is EK Cryofuel Mystic Fog. We did a news piece about this last week, as I recall, and I think the only way I'm going to get coolant in this reservoir is by using the squeezy bottle and by laying the case down flat and filling the loop bit by bit. Time for the moment of truth. That Mystic Fog coolant is really peculiar. You can barely see it's pumping. Okay, I can see it's pumping now. Wow, fast. Right, let's hook up a monitor and sort out the PWM. Do you remember when I said
I'm going to go for a slightly more complicated approach that may or may not work? It might be a catastrophe.
That's right, it all went wrong. You're going to have to imagine many hours of me looking at a black screen and then pulling apart the PC piece by piece and figuring out what on earth was going on because it wouldn't post. And I think the problem is this PCI Express riser. So that's come out. Graphics card is in native to the motherboard. It now seems to be behaving absolutely perfectly. I'm going to crack on and do more testing and then tell you all about the thermals. To test the thermals, I've gone for 4 scenarios. Fans running at half speed with the front panel in place, fans running at half speed, front panel removed, fans running at full speed, front panel in place, fans running at full speed, front panel removed. The fans, the 2 I added in run at 1800 RPM max, the 2 installed at the front that come with the case 1500 RPM. And thermals are pretty impressive when you consider we've got 475 watts of power draw at the wall socket with this RTX 3080 and Ryzen 9 3900X. In TimeSpy's stress test, in that worst case scenario, so fans running at half speed with the front panel installed, i.e. as you might well use a PC such as this, the peak CPU temperature, that's die average, is 80 degrees C and the GPU is 63 degrees C. Pull off the front panel, CPU drops 7 degrees, GPU drops 2 degrees. Crank up the fan speed and leave the panel in place, CPU now drops to 69. GPU to 56, leave the fans running at 100%, pull off the front panel, CPU is now 67 and the GPU is 54. I find it very hard to pick fault with the Eclipse P360A. For the money you're getting a perfectly decent case with a pair of PWM RGB fans and RGB that's in the chassis itself. I'm running the RGB off the motherboard at the moment and as you can see it's going through the colour cycle perfectly nicely. It's playing very happily. The combo of Gigabyte, AlphaCool and Phanteks working very well indeed. My only nasty experience during the build was that riser cable, which is taking a PCI Express Gen 4 motherboard with a PCI Express Gen 4 CPU and a PCI Express Gen 4 graphics card and then hooking it together with a PCI Express Gen 3 riser cable. Whoops, won't be doing that again in a hurry, believe you me. Apart from that, I think the result has turned out absolutely fabulously and I'm deeply impressed. Phanteks, the Eclipse P360A, it's a winner.